Hello and a very warm welcome viewers. You're watching Reset India with your host Kriti Mishra. Our show focuses on all the key areas where resetting, revamping or restructuring is required for boosting India's economic growth prospects. The government will roll out on 1st of April a proposed production-linked incentive scheme for white goods, under which eligible investors in air conditioners and LED lights will be granted incentives worth 6,238 crore rupees over 5 years. The PLI scheme for white goods, which is being spearheaded by the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, was one of the 13 such schemes announced by the government in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic last year. The idea was to lure mainly large companies to ramp up manufacturing base and boost exports. And for deeper insights, I'm joined by Mr. A.S. Bhal, former Economic Advisor, Government of India, and Mr. Sanjay Aggarwal, President, PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Welcome to Rajya Sabha Television, both of you. And in fact, before we commence our discussion, few important insights for our viewers. So the DPIIT expects the incentive to result in incremental production of ACs and LED lights worth 1,68,000 crore over 5 years. It may lead to additional exports of 64,400 crore rupees, extra direct tax collection of 11,300 crore rupees, and GST mop-up of 38,000 crore rupees over 5 years. And let's go back to our guests now. And Mr. Bhal, coming to you first. Your opening comments on the PLI scheme for the white goods sector.
This has to be seen against the backdrop of the production-linked incentive scheme, which the government has launched for 13 sectors. 3 of them were launched in March 2020, and 10 were launched in November 2020. And as you know, once the government gives in principle approval, then the respective ministries had to get the final cabinet approvals and give the nuanced program, dot the I's and cross the T's. So the production-linked incentive for white goods falls under the domain of DPIIT, Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. And they've been working very hard on the cabinet note, and it should come through. So all these have been really thought through very intensively. You know, the pandemic hit the global economy, and Indian manufacturing as it is was trying to get a boost. So after a lot of stakeholder consultation with industry, with CII, FICCI, with ASSOCHAM, and with states and other academia, it was decided that this huge boost to production through the production-linked incentives be provided. And these incentives are basically for the industries to gain economies of scale, to export, and to sort of engage themselves in the global value chain. So this is a very well thought out scheme where incentives are given based on actual extra production and sales. And it's meant to provide the big economies of scale which any country needs at this point of stage to engage with the global value chain. So all I'll say is all the best. And I'm sure the 3 schemes which have already been approved and notified, that is the pharmaceutical products, the big electronics manufacturing, and the pharma sector, the 3 schemes which have already been announced in March 2020 and which have been notified are doing well. There are good results on the ground. And I'm sure the production-linked incentive scheme for the rest of the 10 sectors will also show the same efficacy.
Absolutely, sir. And you made an important point about integrating our indigenous units into global supply chain and global value chain. Mr. Aggarwal, your thoughts, would this scheme be a game changer for the white goods segment?
I definitely think so, and I totally agree with Mr. Bhan that this scheme is a very, very well thought out and very, very, I must say, logical scheme that, we have now actually hit the nail on its head when we want to talk about increasing the size of our industry or becoming globally competitive. Earlier, the focus used to be practically towards, even for exports, or rather the focus used to be on exports and incentive to be provided in terms of schemes like MEIS or drawback or whatever to try and give some benefit to the exporter. The the problem with that approach is that by itself, even if it might be required by itself, that is not a comprehensive solution to the problem of the exporter, because if the domestic industry does not have the critical mass and the supply chain developed to a certain extent in which the industry can depend on local inputs which are cost competitive and of the required quality, it is not feasible to be a long-term and a competitive exporter. With the PLI scheme, if you look at the benefits, the benefit number one is that you are adding on to the existing production and you are actually multiplying that production. By multiplying that production, you are giving the opportunity for not only that industry itself, for its supply chain, for its suppliers to all scale up. And as the volumes in the Indian market grow, then those volumes by themselves justify further investment into the capex and into improvement of the product, and then one is able to export at a much more competitive price. In addition to this, if you look at the government's books, these are books which are not balanced. They are actually in a big credit, because for the amount that the government would spend on PLI incentive, the amount of direct tax and the GST collection by themselves would be in multiples of the amount given out as incentives. So the government is the gainer, the industry is the gainer, the industry becomes competitive, and the approach to look at individual sectors, and gradually there will be a clamor for across the board, more and more industries would want to be included, which is a good thing. Now, ACs is a typical example. There was a huge volume of imports coming into the country,
Right.
which now we should be able to reverse the direction. Our market size should also hopefully increase. Our market size, I understand, is just 7.5 million units, whereas China, the biggest market, is more than 7 to 8 times of that size. So if we are able to build up our production, then we are able to export more, we are able to consume more, and we are able to, generate much more taxes.
Absolutely,
Overall,
sir.
there could not be a better win-win situation for everybody.
True, sir. It's going to be a win-win situation for all the stakeholders, but you talked about reversing the direction. Mr. Bhal, I have some important statistics here. India imports for air conditioners, refrigerators and washing machines amounted to $1.86 billion, primarily coming from China, Thailand and Vietnam in the sector. How do we cut our dependence on the imports?
So imports from our neighboring countries are coming in because they are providing good value goods at a reasonable price. And Indian manufacturing, the domestic manufacturing, for various reasons, were not able to produce the same goods at the same price. India is very closely integrated in the global, not only the value chain, but also the trade. You'll be surprised that the share of exports and imports of India vis-a-vis the GDP is higher than that even of China. So India is an economy which is well integrated into the global economy, and here you have to produce things at the for global market, and quality has to be of a global level. So till now, India was not being able to do it, and suddenly, this urgency has crept in with the coming in of that pandemic and things, and it was realized that India has to sort of get its act together and become global. So this big incentive, the production-linked incentive, was thought through after a lot of discussion with Niti Aayog, DPIIT and the industry bodies, and it was realized that for India has to earn the economies of scale. For Indian white goods like ACs and LED bulbs to be competitive, you have to build scale, and only then will the economies of scale kick in, and only then will you improve your quality and produce up to global standard. So to cut down these imports, which is the medium and long term view, we have to produce at the global level. We have to produce in bulk, we have to earn the economies of scale, and we have to improve our quality, and we have to improve our marketing, logistics, and what have you. So through this huge production-linked incentive, we want to trigger off that entire ecosystem of the production of white goods in the country, where there's a lot of emphasis on quality, where the logistics are improving, where the export incentives are harnessed properly, and India manages to firstly reduce imports and then produce for the world market. All this will also bring in a boost to our employment also. So the Indian economy is going through, I would say, slightly, not too healthy on the employment front also. So boosting domestic manufacturing generic is also very important in a thought with the government. And, we might sometimes even have to put a bit of a tariff wall, and we have to put some quality standards. So we might have to do that also. But there's no denying that the need of the hour is to boost white goods manufacture in India and to go on to the export front.
All right, sir, you made three very important points, and let me take that to Mr. Aggarwal. Sir, the government has done its bit. It would be unveiling the PLI scheme for the white goods sector. But 3 points, as Mr. Bhal pointed out: economies of scale, quality production, and competitive prices. Is the Indian industry ready for it?
You see, basically, the Indian industry is very excited over the PLI scheme. In fact, sectors are vying to demand from the government as to their sector also being included, those which are not already on to the PLI scheme. There are 13 sectors which have been identified. Reason being that I think the Indian industry had been bogged in due to the lack of size, the lack of global muscle. And this is the best opportunity possible to have the push for attaining the size which is going to be globally competitive. All that means is that you have to be price competitive, you have to be of the requisite quality, and therefore for both these things, you must have a strong and reliable and a competitive supply chain. All of that is always built on the strength of volumes. And this is the basic logic behind introducing PLI. Once you do that, once you have got the volumes, not only are you supplying more reasonably priced and better quality goods into the domestic market, but you are able to export and fight competition in the international markets on a much stronger wicket. So this is something which each and every sector is very, very happy to have this facility. And the government's projections are, I think, very well calculated projections, where you see that even for this particular sector of white goods, against 6,000 crores of the incentive that is planned, we are looking at much bigger multiples in terms of direct taxes and GST also to be collected. So it is, I think, the wisest decision to try and this is the absolutely brilliant stroke for the government to have arrived on this conclusion, and I think the industry is fully in support.
All right, so Mr. Aggarwal says that the Indian industry is absolutely ready for it. But talking about the opportunities, Mr. Bhal, global appliance and consumer electronics industry is expected to grow at 9% during 2017-2022 to reach $48.37 billion in 2022. And the Indian appliance and consumer electronics industry is expected to grow at 11% to reach at $21.18 billion in 2019, between 2019 and 25. Opportunities ahead for the Indian domestic industries.
If you see it in perspective, Indian manufacturing as a percentage of GDP has stuck at 16%. Despite our best efforts over the last 7 or 8 years, Indian manufacturing as a share of GDP has been stuck at 16%. And although even in the national manufacturing policy in 2011, the government said we'll increase manufacturing as a share of GDP from 16 to 25, well, it didn't happen. And as we all know, as our consultations with industrialists and with states tell us, it's because there is a slightly higher cost of doing business in India, that land, labor, electricity charges, infrastructure slightly higher. And on top of that, you have this ease of doing business also. Although we've done so well, we've jumped from 143 position to 63. But on the ground, a lot of industrialists tell us that this ease of doing business is also an issue. So once, we are hammering at both these things. We are trying to bring down the cost of doing business, sort of capital is being provided better, some incentives are being given, the logistics cost is being brought down. And along with that, there's a very focused effort on improving the ease of doing business.
Yes.
And as our Honorable Prime Minister has said, we propose to come down to less than 50 rank in the global sweepstakes. Out of about 160 countries, 170 countries, we are 63rd in the rank of ease of doing business, and we propose to bring it down to 50. So, generically speaking, and that applies to our consumer goods durable segment also, the white goods, this is the time for the manufacturing industry. Things are falling in place, and this is the sort of inflection point in Indian manufacturing. And if we take it at the right, if we take it at in the right spirit, India sort of there'll be a paradigm shift in the Indian manufacturing scene. And things seem to be falling in place. The global pandemic came in. There's a slight disenchantment with some of our neighboring countries. People are trying to move out of those global value chains based in some of our big neighboring countries. India is opening at the red carpet. We've reduced our corporate taxes. We're improving our logistics. We're providing production-linked incentives. Hopefully it's a sort of time when, it's a time for Indian manufacturing. Its time has come. And no better time than this for all goods, including our consumer white good, to sort of grab the thing and sort of take off to a higher trajectory of growth. All I can say is with a very strong cooperation with industry, I'm sure it's going to happen.
All right, as you say that the time has come, and also you point towards this change in the manufacturing paradigm of India. Mr. Aggarwal, why should global firms invest in India or make in India?
In answer to your question, the fact is that almost the whole world was majorly depending on just one economy to deliver most of its manufactured goods for the past nearly 20 years plus.
Right.
And this dependence was put into question last year due to a host of factors. The first event being the COVID-19 pandemic, in which case the supplies out of China were disrupted because of the pandemic itself. That caused a huge disruption across the world, which was the first lesson to the whole world on having your total logistics and total supply chain dependent on one economy. And then thereafter, the sort of belligerent attitude that the Chinese government took in terms of its relations with various economies and its neighbors, in terms of both political issues and in terms of economic disputes, wherein it was very adamant and was very fast in shutting off the supply spigots on many items where it was not, the Chinese felt aggrieved or whatever. It taught a lesson to the whole world that you cannot depend on just one country, and that too a country which is not fully committed to the rules of law, to the rule of law. And I think from that point of view, most of the major economies and businesses and companies have decided that they need at least China plus one, if nothing else. And if you need China plus one, there are many options, of course, available to most global players. But the only economy, the only country in the world which has got a domestic market comparable in size to China and the depth of manpower availability and the size of the economy to support large industry is India. So, considering both these factors, what we see is that the move for PLI, and we would of course wish it from the PhD Chamber of Commerce side, we would want it to be extended to maximum possible sectors. The advantage that it gives is that the global companies, the global chains, the global supply chains have the advantage of a large domestic market, a large pool of young labor, and at the same time, a reliable, politically stable country which is not going to change its policies overnight and which is not going to walk away from its commitments overnight. All said and done, there cannot be any better bet than India. But for that to happen, of course, we needed something to kickstart the process, and PLI is absolutely something that the doctor ordered.
All right, Mr. Bhal, as Mr. Aggarwal says, is the PLI scheme the most effective way to achieve Atmanirbhar Bharat?
Yeah, I will agree with that. A lot of consultations, a lot of churning has gone around selecting the most potent and best instrument to boost manufacturing in the current scenario. And after a lot of consultations, the government and industry has come around to the thinking that the production linked incentive is the best way to go forward, because it provides incentives, it boosts production and exports in sectors which we think we are going to be globally competitive. It will help us engage in the global value chain. And also there are a couple of labor intensive sectors also. So it will boost employment also. So if you look at the scheme in its entirety, at this point of time, I'll definitely agree with Mr. Aggarwal that this is the best instrumentality. This is the best major instrument, the production linked incentive scheme, to boost production. Of course, the government has its other investment, sort of boosting schemes. You've got the startup scheme in India going on. You've got this infrastructure upgradation scheme. You've got those various industrial parks. All those things are there. But at this point of time, if there's a single instrument, if you ask, which will provide a big thrust to Indian manufacturing, it will be this production linked incentive scheme. And this has been thought through with experts from DPIIT, Commerce, Niti Aayog, ASSOCHAM, FICCI, CII, Academia. So this is a product of a lot of thinking, and it's actually delivering on the ground. So I can say for sure that the 3 PLI schemes which were approved in March 2020, the mobile phone, the large manufacturing, and the pharmaceutical products, those things have got good traction on the ground. So as we say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Those 3 PLI schemes have already are bearing fruit, and I'm quite confident, given the the strength and exuberance of the Indian industry and the sort of very cordial way the entire industrial ecosystem is developing, that this instrument will really put India on the high manufacturing growth path.
And of course, the focus is to make India a hub of global manufacturing. Before we end this conversation, closing comments from both my guests. Mr. Aggarwal.
Well, I would say that as PhD Chamber of Commerce, our basic expectation is that this scheme needs to be extended to more and more sectors on a progressive basis. Of course, we can't be cavalier about this, but it must be done on a very progressive basis. This is the scheme which is going to help the industry tide over the disadvantages that we have, as Mr. Bhal mentioned, on land, labor, logistics, not to mention the cost of capital. I think all these disadvantages we don't get wiped away by this PLI scheme, but do give us a large push. And then on top of the large Indian market, if we are able to be competitive in exports, I think that is what is going to make our industry, really globally competitive. And I think all power to the government to implement this scheme for more and more sectors.
Mr. Bhal, your closing comments, sir.
Yeah, to just put it in perspective, over the last 3-4 years, the DPIIT has been working on industrial policy and investment promotion. And for the last 1.5 to 2 years, a lot of talk went on, just making industry competitive, providing the right ecosystem, allowing intellectual property rights. And some people argued those are motherhood and apple pie statements. Right. So those are, generic statements like a mission statement that won't hold water. And when the new government came, and with the new minister, Shri Piyush Goyal, and with the support from industry bodies like PhD Chamber, it was realized you have to provide specific sector-specific incentives and provide them to industrialists on the ground. So there's a big change in thinking from motherhood and apple pie statements about increasing competitiveness and making India globally competitive. Now we've come down to very specific incentives to sectors.
Absolutely, sir. And the government is giving sector-specific incentives to the industry to make India a global hub of manufacturing. On that note, thank you so much for joining us. So that's all we had for you in this edition of Reset India. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.